You may know how to cook the perfect steak, but there's still a good chance you believe at least some of the most pervasive steak cooking myths out there. These are the common myths about steak that are actually false. One aspect of eating a steak that can really turn some non-red meat lovers off is the pinkish red liquid that oozes out of a juicy steak. It can be unsettling because, yes, it does kind of look like blood. In fact, we often call a very rare steak bloody.
How do you want that cooked? Burnt to a crisp or bloody as hell? Bloody as hell.
However, you won't find blood even in the rarest of steaks. The liquid coming out of a cooked steak is actually called myoglobin, and it's a protein in animal tissue. Myoglobin serves to deliver oxygen to the muscles of an animal. Luckily for every steak lover out there, it's safe to eat and doesn't have anything to do with blood. The myoglobin in a steak will darken as it's cooked, which is why a rare steak looks a lot bloodier than a more well-done steak. All that juiciness is part of what makes a well-cooked steak so enjoyable, so embrace it. We've all heard it for years. Eating meat that's too raw or rare is dangerous.
This steak is completely raw. What kind of sick, twisted restaurant is this?
In many cases, this is true. You certainly wouldn't want to eat chicken or turkey that's still pink in the middle for risk of getting sick. And it is important to make sure meat and animal products are heated to a certain temperature before consuming. But eating a rare steak, while it can pose some health risks, is not quite as dangerous as consuming other types and cuts of rare meat. The majority of the bacteria that can make you sick from raw meat is on the surface of the meat itself, which is why most cooks don't want pink in the middle ground beef. Grinding the meat can introduce bacteria into the whole of the product. On the other hand, a steak doesn't have that problem, as most of the bacteria will remain on the surface. If you want just about any meat to be more flavorful, it's a good idea to salt it before you start cooking it. Most people know this, yet the myth that it's bad to salt your steak before cooking is still pervasive. However, there's generally not a lot of information about exactly why steak should supposedly be salt-free before it hits the skillet or the grill. Perhaps that's because there's no good reason not to salt your steak. Not only does the salt bring out more flavor from the meat, but salt is also important for a process called dry brining. Generally speaking, it's best practice to salt your steak about 40 minutes to 2 hours before you're ready to start cooking it. If you forget to plan ahead, you can also sprinkle some salt onto the steak right before you put it in the pan. One mistake you don't wait to make though, salting your steak 5 to 10 minutes before you start cooking. At that point, the salt will have brought the moisture to the surface of the steak, but it won't have had enough time to dry out. It seems to be common knowledge in the kitchen that there's a specific number of times you're allowed to flip a steak.
Just say it out loud. One time.
No good cook would dare to flip a steak more than once, right? Turns out that's a myth. Flipping a steak multiple times can actually prevent it from drying out too much. There's also less of a chance that the meat will end up being overdone on one side or the other. But if that's the case, where did this myth even come from? Perhaps it's because many cooks want that beautiful crosshatch pattern on their slab of meat, in which case flipping only once is essential. But as chef and food celebrity Samin Nosrat notes in her Netflix special, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, those pretty crosshatches you see on steaks and TV and commercials may look good, but they actually probably don't taste as good as a steak that's been cooked more evenly.
They're all about the grill marks and the perfect 90-degree crosshatches. Those people are missing out on flavor because browning is flavor.
This myth makes a lot of sense at first glance. The reasoning behind it is this: sticking a fork in your steak before it's on your plate only lets the juices run out of it, juices you want to be sealed inside. Yes, of course, you might lose some of those juices when you stick a fork in it, but it's not going to make a difference when it comes to taste or tenderness. Want to flip your steak with a fork? It may not be conventional, but we don't judge, and it's not going to ruin your steak. Not only is stabbing your steak with a fork before you sit down to eat not a sin, but you may even want to take it a step further. While you can never truly know if your steak is fully cooked without using a meat thermometer, checking the color of the inside of your steak by cutting it open can give you an idea of how long you need to leave it on the heat. It may not result in the prettiest, most flawless steak, but it can help amateurs get a feel for how to cook a steak specifically to their liking. Everyone seems to have an opinion about the best cut of meat to get if you want a top-quality steak, but filet is always a top choice. Some, in fact, believe it's the only kind of steak you should even bother with.
This is a $54 steak.
Oh, congratulations, it looks really good.
Yes, it does.
But if you adopt this attitude, you're going to miss out on a lot of variety and some amazing culinary experiences. Filet is more tender than other cuts, which is a big bonus. But cuts like ribeye or a sirloin are going to offer a fattier, richer taste since they have more fat marbling. The benefits of branching out and trying different cuts of meat is manifold. First of all, filet is the most expensive kind of steak, so if you offer something different from time to time, you may save some cash.
When you're young, it's all fillet steak, but as the years go by, you have to move on to the cheaper cuts.
If you're passing up the grill for your skillet when it's time to cook your steak, you may wonder what kind of fat you should be using to sear your piece of meat. Simple oil is a popular choice here, as is butter. These options can be delicious, but they aren't the only options out there. Those who really want to give their steaks a kick of extra flavor might want to opt for an alternative: beef fat.
Wait, the secret ingredient in the beef is beef?
When your pan heats up, you can add a bit of rendered beef fat to the bottom. Just keep in mind that you don't want to use too much fat at the bottom of your pan, or you may end up boiling your steak. Instead, it's possible to simply brush beef fat directly onto your steak. And yes, that tastes just as delicious as it sounds. One very common steak myth is that it's essential to sear a steak as soon as it hits the heat to lock in all the juices that might otherwise escape. The idea behind this is that the seared side of the steak acts as a barrier, creating a barrier on the outside of the steak the juices can't get through. This is a complete myth though, as juices can still easily escape a seared steak. Cooks who truly want that brown, delicious crust on the surface of their steak might want to try a different method. It may sound unconventional, but heating a thick steak gently at first, and then searing it can actually produce better, more delicious results. This is because the cooking element will begin to dry out the steak when it's on low heat, and it also cooks the cut of meat more evenly. By the time you're ready to sear, your steak will be ready to take on that beautiful dark brown color. Not long ago, putting sauce on a steak wasn't the crime that it is today. Catching a glimpse of an A1 steak sauce bottle at a steakhouse wasn't grounds to leave the restaurant entirely. It might even be expected, but times have changed. It's generally accepted that a good steak should under no circumstances find itself smothered with sauce, taking away from the true taste of the meat. Consumers have rejected traditional steak sauces for good reason. These sauces can largely mask the taste of a high-quality steak instead of bringing out its true flavor. But that doesn't mean you should ditch the sauce entirely. An alternative to heavier sauces is a light chimichurri sauce. Chimichurri hails from Uruguay and Argentina, where a beef-heavy diet is common. Rather than covering the taste of steak, a nice chimichurri will highlight all its strengths. Now that's a reason to celebrate.
Come on, I'll buy a steak.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more MASH videos about your favorite foods are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.